One of the first skills Excel users learn is how to cut and paste data within and among workbooks. When you assign a cell's value to a variable and then write that variable's value to another cell, you're just copying the value. If you want to include the cell's formatting, any comments, or so on, in addition to the value, you should use cut and paste. When you cut or copy cells and then paste them elsewhere in your workbook using VBA, you need to use the select method, not the activate method, to designate the cells and worksheets used in the routine. The differences between the activate and select methods are technical, but let me illustrate the relevant aspect by highlighting a range of cells. In this case, I selected the cell range from B7 down to D18. Within that selection, every cell is highlighted in a bluish gray except for one. That cell, B7 here, at the top left corner of the selection, is called the active cell. You've seen me refer to it in other movies using the active cell, all one word, term, and I've taken its value and assigned its value. So there you have the active cell. Everything here outlined is called the selection. Because those cells are selected, I can now copy them by pressing Control-C, and you see that we have a marquee or marching ants outlined around that selection. If I press Escape, it goes away. Now let's see what those same actions look like in VBA. Pressing Alt F11, and I have the cut paste macro. What this macro does is cut the selection, changes to another worksheet, in this case the summary worksheet, and then with that worksheet active and selected, it pastes any data from the clipboard into the active cell, and then it leaves cut copy mode. That's the equivalent of me pressing the Escape key to remove the outline from around the cells that I selected. The macro that I've created here does assume that I've already selected the cells that I want to cut and that the active cell on the target worksheet, in this case summary, has already been selected as well. So I'll just flip back to the workbook to make sure that that is the case. The cells are selected, and on the summary worksheet, the target cell, A14, is active. So Alt F11 to switch back, and I'll press F5 to run the macro. Didn't see anything happen here, but when I press Alt F11 to go back, see that the summary worksheet has been selected and that the data has been pasted into my worksheet correctly. Because I used cut, the data is gone from this original worksheet. One thing to remember is that because I used a macro to cut the values from this worksheet, I can't undo the operation by pressing Control-Z. When I do, nothing happens. That means that if I want to put the values back into this worksheet, I need to switch over to the worksheet where they went, copy the values, and paste them back in. As I mentioned previously, the macros that I'd written assumed that this cell range, B7 through D18, was already selected before I ran them. This time, I'll modify the copy and paste macro so that you can do the same thing in code and you don't have to intervene with it by hand. I'll also show you how to select the target cell on the summary worksheet. So I will clear the selection from there and press Alt F11 to go back to my code window. To select data in preparation for cutting or copying it, you need to first activate the worksheet from which you're going to select that data. So the worksheet name is 2010, and I will activate it. Next, I need to specify the cells that I want to copy so I can select them. For that, I have range B7 through D18 dot select. Now that that's done, I can press F5 and let's press F11 to go back and see what happened. We're on the summary worksheet and the data has been pasted incorrectly. And if the copy worked, then it should also still be on the 2010 worksheet, which it is. Now, one question that might come up is, when would you want to do this in a VBA macro? If you're moving a lot of data from one place to another, you can use a macro to do so. Alternatively, if you're reaching into many other workbooks and pulling in data and putting them into a single place, then you can also use copy and paste there. As with most macros, anytime that you perform an action repeatedly, it makes sense to automate it. And also, if you're working with large groups of data, then automation can reduce the number of errors you commit. One thing I haven't covered in this movie is paste special. There are many, many paste special options that are at your disposal. So if you want to use one of them, I recommend that you record a macro where you perform those actions and then include that code in your subroutines. You should be able to adapt it with no trouble using the techniques I showed you earlier.